I think if you asked 10 people why they joined a Unitarian Universalist congregation, odds are that more than a couple would say something about being with like-minded people. This is natural. When we gather around, we want to be with people with whom we have something important in common. However, it also has its limits, because the circle of people with whom we agreed on everything would be very, very, very small. And sometimes, when we're too focused on being like-minded, we try to paper over or ignore the ways in which we might come into conflict, because we're just not all alike. There's a great 1959 novella by Evan Connell called Mrs. Bridge, and its partner novella were made into a wonderful movie many years later, Mr. and Mrs. Bridge. Mrs. Bridge, well, let me give you this little story that will kind of encapsulate who she is. Her ladies' auxiliary discussed whether to, this is a quote, amend its constitution so as to include the words under God. The resolution was passed. Of 56 ladies present, 54 voted to include God. Mrs. Bridge wished it could have been unanimous. The novella goes on. Unanimity was so gratifying. Every time she heard or read about a unanimous vote, she felt a surge of pride and was reminded for some reason of the Pilgrims. I know, right? She's quite a character. What we see in that little vignette is a deep fear of conflict, of difference even, because difference has such potential to lead to conflict. And I think that that fear is natural. I hope so. I'm pretty fearful about conflict myself. Conflict can be the first step to loss. It tells us that loss might happen, a splitting of relationships, a difficult future where we thought things were going to be easy. There's a comfort in unanimity, in like-mindedness. You know that this boat is not going to be rocked. And if we do become aware of conflict, even difference, then to address the conflict, the difference, we're going to have to make ourselves vulnerable in at least a few ways. We're going to have to extend trust. We'll have to listen. And we will have to share what we need. Those can all be pretty scary. Well, as I'm sure many people have told you before, and maybe like me, you have gritted your teeth at hearing it, conflict is inevitable in human life. And so is getting nervous about conflict. I don't think it's ever completely easy. But there is a lot of good news, as Eric shared and as I'll come around to in a few minutes. So when we're afraid, there are various responses with a nice little mnemonic. I'm sure you've heard of them. Fight, flight, freeze, fawn. I'll take them not in order. Flight is getting away. So if you fear that there's a conflict with a friend, say, with a partner, with a member of your community, you try to avoid the situation. You might avoid the person if necessary. So you can see how this is not good for relationships. Freeze is paralysis. I'm just not going to move. Best not to act at all. Stay off the touchy subject. Don't engage. This is where people ghost each other or become distant. Again, an understandable response, a kind of instinct when we're afraid of something, but not really good at helping our relationships go deeper. Fawn. Fawning is making nice, making ourselves small, using all sorts of cushioning words. I just wondered if maybe, with this idea that if we're nice to everyone, no one will be angry and all the conflicts will dissolve. Now, being nice is very nice. I'm certainly not coming up here to say we should speak to one another brusquely. But conflicts don't just go away like that. They're not just the product of people being not nice. They're the product of people having different opinions, different hopes for their lives, or different ways of making them real. And so coming back around to fight, now that might sound like engagement. You're fighting. Okay, there's a conflict here. I'm going to get right into it. I'm going to move toward the conflict. But fighting is often another kind of avoidance. Like the kids in the school, in the song that I shared, right? They decide to yell, they decide to wave their arms and stamp their feet. This is all tackling the monster, trying to scare it away, and it's not really engaging with the issue until that little girl comes up and says, here's what I need. That's engaging. Here's the problem you're creating for me. That's engaging. Fighting is just a way to not have that conversation. Now, having spent many years in congregations, like many of you, I've noticed a lot of ways that avoidance of conflict engagement can play out in congregational life. And again, while it's really understandable, it's not really helpful for the relationships in the long run. So here's a case from many years ago. I was teaching a Bible class, Bible for Unitarian Universalists, right? Many of us want to be biblically literate. We can have really interesting conversations about this ancient text, which maybe we've never had an opportunity to talk about outside a kind of fundamentalist approach. So I was really excited about this, and lots of people were really excited, and we had great conversations in this class. And then in one session early on, there was an open disagreement. Okay, people actually voiced a conflict. That's good. They did it nicely. It wasn't explosive or rude. But there was an open disagreement between one person, a man who said, why are we even doing this in a Unitarian Universalist congregation? Why are we bothering with this text at all? And the other person, a woman who said, if you feel that way, why are you here this evening? It wasn't rude or heated. It was just, hey, we're here to talk about the Bible. You're raising an interesting point, but this is what we're going to do right now. They had a difference of opinion on the whole point of having the class, right? And they brought it to the surface. And then in the next session, the man who thought, why are we even bothering to do this, didn't come. And the person who said to him, are you sure you even want to be here if you don't think this is a worthwhile way to spend our time? She didn't come either. Neither of them ever came back to that class. I think what we were seeing there was conflict avoidance. And it was a real loss for the group and for them. We had a conflict there. It was hard. I don't want that to happen again, so I am staying away from that room and that group of people. We've all been there with some group or other, right? In the congregation or elsewhere in our lives. Speaking of groups, in small groups in congregations, like our Soul Matters or Chalice circles at other congregations, men's groups, LGBT groups, anything like that, small groups can get an equilibrium they like. You get to that place where you're really humming, you know each other, you trust each other, you're sharing in a deep way, and it's really great. And what can happen to small groups after that is that because they've got something really good going on, something which, let's face it, is hard to come by in this very fragmented, isolated society that we have created for ourselves. They've got something really precious, and they become nervous about bringing in new people. That might upset the balance. It might even end the group. So they do a couple things. They vet them. Like you can bring a friend, or we will all talk about it. When somebody says they want to join this group, we'll have a couple sessions where we all talk about it, and then we'll let them know if they can come. Well, naturally, that isn't very welcoming. Nobody wants to feel like they've applied for a scholarship, when they're just asked to be in a small group. Yes or no, you're going to approve of me. So that's not very welcoming. And sometimes to avoid that whole mess, small groups just don't welcome in anybody new at all. They're doing fine. We don't need anybody new. Except that groups dwindle. Somebody dies. Somebody moves away. Somebody gets a job that it doesn't work anymore for them to come on Thursday nights. And suddenly the group is 4 people and they just can't keep this thing going anymore. That's sad. And we see the same thing on a congregational scale. We see it, it's not only Unitarian Universalists, I promise you, but we do see it continent-wide as Unitarian Universalists. That if we don't risk welcoming in with open arms people who we don't know yet, we're going to just shrink. We don't know them. We came here, each of us stayed because we found something we loved. Whether we grew up in the congregation, or we came here just a couple years ago, or we came here 25 years ago, we stayed because we liked it. And so there's an inherent conservatism there. Oh, but what if it changes too much and I don't like it anymore and I lose this thing that's really important to me? Again, the fear is really understandable. But new people, they are new. And they do change things, and they challenge us, and they bring wonderful stuff, like we can be friends and have wonderful friendships we never had before, and they can bring in conflicts that we didn't have before, because that's the particular combination of people that we've got now. And so we just by attrition, get smaller and smaller. But we are here. We are here in this congregation. We are here in this religious movement to learn and to grow as individuals and to have an impact as a group. And that calls for us to respond to conflict differently, to actually engage with it, and to trust, to have faith that we can be honest and vulnerable with each other, like the little girl who said, "Hey, monster, this is what I need." We're not monsters. We don't have multiple heads and 12 eyes. So maybe we can confront our fears and be real with each other. So, looking at our covenant, it's really striking. I said, oh my goodness, we have to read this today, because it's very striking how many points of this covenant are about dealing with conflict or difference. Okay, the first part is we pledge to seek unity in our diversity. Well, okay, that's great. And sometimes we do, right? Sometimes you ask the monster to move, you say, "You're in the way," and he's like, "Oh, I didn't even know. There's no real conflict here, right? Okay, I'll move." Okay, there's a conflict for City Hall, but, sometimes it's that simple, right? Sometimes it's easy to find the unity in our diversity, but it goes both ways, right? We also pledge, dare I say, to recognize the diversity among us. We're not going to pretend to all be the same. And then the next part is we welcome and respect divergent opinions and beliefs. Ooh, that gets right down to it. That's brave. That's really brave. To welcome and respect them, to say we don't all think the same, we don't all believe the same. That's part of being a UU. And we're gonna not only respect them, make room for them, but we're going to welcome them. We're going to invite conversations where we discover our differences. Yeah, we're training ourselves in how to deal with conflict. And here's the next step, to listen to one another with open hearts and minds. Well, that's a major way that we actually do this work. Hard, though. It's like it's getting harder and harder. Here we go. The next step is to acknowledge our shortcomings. I hate doing that. I don't know about you. I'd like to pretend I don't have any, and what do you know? Times of conflict really, people are outrageous. They actually tell me about my shortcomings. And be quick to forgive them in others, which is also not always easy. And then, well, this could be a whole other sermon, but the very last line is to keep our focus on our mission, which is maybe a reminder, hey, this is all worth it. There's a reason we're doing this. There's a reason that we do this difficult thing of being in community. It's wonderful. It's fun. We love each other. We sing together. We eat cupcakes together. We get to know each other. We make friends. We take care of each other in hard times. But it's also hard. Relationships, they have conflict in them, and that can be scary. Now, Mrs. Bridge is a cautionary tale about what happens when we don't engage in conflict, when we go about it in this sort of avoidant way that she has. It is no coincidence that a central problem for this character is her lack of close relationships. She has a husband, she has 3 children whom we see grow up over the course of the book. She has people she socializes with, she even has a best friend. But there's a real distance between her and each of these people. Because, well, as Eric said, you can't have intimate relationships if you can't be vulnerable. And if you're afraid to engage in conflict, it's hard to go really deep. So her children, as they grow up, feel alienated from her. Her husband is a mystery to her. She's afraid to ask him about his yearnings or share her own. And just how little she knows about her best friend becomes devastatingly clear over the course of the book. And for more on that, you'll just have to read it, which I strongly recommend. So there's all these reasons not to avoid conflict, not to avoid engaging. But let me put it more positively. There are tremendous rewards in learning to move toward conflict. Like the example from the Time for All Ages. Sometimes you talk it out, and very quickly the conflict is resolved and everyone is happy except the grown-ups at City Hall who need to learn to do the same thing. Sometimes it really is that simple. Sometimes it's not. But the same principle stands. The same thing that little girl did and led her classmates. Know what you need and want. You got to figure it out. You got to know yourself. State what that is. Be polite and clear about it. Here's the problem. Here's what I'm asking of you. And listen to the other person. If the first level doesn't do that, if the monster says, listen, I got no place else to sit, okay? Then you're going to have to do it again. Okay, how can we meet all of our needs? How can we get in there and have our lunch and you still have comfort? Maybe you won't be sitting. Maybe you'll be lying down in the park, you know. You can think of parallels in conversations you've had with a spouse or another family member, with a friend. It's communication. And sometimes it takes lots of levels of listening before you can get to where you can actually, oh, that's our common ground. And then we have the example of we can work it out. Now, I suggested that song. Like I said, I am aware that the singer falls short in a couple of key ways of modeling good ways to approach conflict. You know, we have to listen and be willing to be changed ourselves. We can't just say, why don't you see things my way, and then this will all be over, okay? Of course. But I love that the song does get a couple things really, really right about how to do conflict. It's an expression of faith in and dedication to a relationship. We love each other. We want to make this work. We don't want to avoid each other. We don't want to freeze or fly. We want to be in here. And that beautiful refrain, life is very short. It's a good reminder. I would just say, versus Lennon and McCartney, that's not why we shouldn't fuss and fight. Sometimes dealing with conflict looks like fussing and fighting. It's messy. But it is why we mustn't waste our lives hiding from each other. Not the people we love. Not the people whom we can see, I really want to work it out with this person. And another thing, another positive reason to engage with conflict, another reason it's not just a necessity, it's where life gets really juicy, is that it calls us to share ourselves, share something true about ourselves, a need we have, a desire we have. And it involves us hearing what other people have to say. And this is where life together gets really exciting. This is where other people stop being just accoutrements to our lives and become a part of who we are. It deepens our relationships when we discover what lies beneath the conflict. What's really going on here? How can we move forward, making us all happy? And that can be as simple as rearranging the chore arrangement at home, and as complicated as resolving a nuclear crisis, like the women of Greenham Common who wrote Building Bridges were trying to do. To find the common ground between us, even if it might be sparse, to get to know each other. This is the true opportunity that difference offers us, if we can move toward that conflict with some confidence. And here's an example from my first marriage. It's something like what Eric said, and okay, so there's a footnote. This marriage did not last, okay, but we had many happy years. And I'm just remembering how very early in my marriage, I was very young, I was married at 23, and when we would argue in those first several months, I was so exhilarated afterwards because we'd really told each other how we felt. It had been hard, and now we understood each other in a new way. And not only had I survived this conflict, oh, thank goodness it's over, but our relationship was richer. It was so exciting to think, oh, this is where we're going together. I don't want to be fighting every day, but it's so good to know. It's exhilarating to know that the conflict can be material for really important growth, individually and together. The first step in all of these things, the first step in moving toward conflict, not away from it, not avoiding it, and not coming in guns blazing and fists swinging so that you're not really engaging with each other, but to really meet each other. The first step is simply to notice. To notice that there is a difference. To notice how we deal with it or avoid dealing with it. To notice our own feelings and our own needs. It's a big first step. This is the final good news I have for you. Hard won as a person who's pretty conflict avoidant by nature. These skills are learnable. We can learn them like anything else, like you learned how to share and put the crayons away back when you were in preschool or nursery school. Now, white middle-class European culture is pretty slow in this learning because it has relied more on conflict avoidance to get along. And then explosions of violence when conflicts inevitably get worse, like they almost always do if you don't deal with them. You escalate from just yelling and stamping your feet to dropping bombs. Again, that's not dealing with conflict. That's not being brave. That's refusing to have the conversations that sooner or later you're going to have. And although we in Unitarian Universalist congregations are by no means all white or middle class or European descended, our congregations are very steeped in that culture. But we can learn these skills like any other. They take practice, they take intelligence, they take goodwill, they take courage. And my friends, we have lots of all that it takes. So may we do.